The candidate for Senate in Maine for the Democrats calls me a Nazi, which is rich coming from a guy who literally has a Nazi tattoo on his chest. And Jasmine Crockett, oh, Jasmine Crockett. The record speaks for itself. She wants to be a senator, though her street girl persona is about as real as her nails. But ask yourself, what do all of these people have in common? And the unfortunate answer is they are puppets. They don't actually matter. They are cogs in a machine that wants to make you poorer, that wants to make you less powerful, and wants to make you less safe in the country your ancestors built. And while President Trump and I are...
So this is where we are now. This is the absolutely grotesque nadir to which the American right wing has descended. Watching J.D. Vance stand before thousands of cheering young conservatives at Turning Point USA's America Fest conference and hurl racialized invective at Democratic leaders with all the casual viciousness of a man who knows exactly what he's doing and feels absolutely no shame about it whatsoever, because shame requires a moral compass. And what we're witnessing here is the complete and utter collapse of any pretense that the modern Republican Party operates with anything resembling ethical constraint or human decency. The Vice President of the United States just called Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who is running for Senate, a street girl whose persona is about as real as her nails, and you need to understand the historical weight of what just happened, because this isn't just garden-variety political mudslinging, this is the deployment of deeply racist tropes that every black woman in America recognizes instantly, because the language creates a caricature that every black woman recognizes as a malicious insult, rooted in centuries of dehumanization, designed to strip black women of their credibility, their intelligence, and their very humanity. And here's what makes this moment so absolutely devastating, so fundamentally revealing about the fascist trajectory of the MAGA movement. Because Vance didn't accidentally slip into this rhetoric, he didn't misspeak or get caught off guard. He deliberately hurled insults against Democrats heading into the midterms, and even launched some early missives at minority party members rumored as 2028 contenders, which means this was calculated, this was strategic, this was the Vice President of the United States, standing on a stage funded by one of the most powerful conservative youth organizations in America, and deciding that the best use of his platform was to attack a black woman's appearance, her authenticity, her very right to exist in political space. Crockett herself noted that she had encountered the same racist tropes throughout her life, and yet here she is, having ascended to the United States Congress through sheer brilliance and determination, and the second highest elected official in this country thinks it's appropriate to reduce her to a caricature about fake nails and street personas. But wait, because it gets so much worse, and you need to sit with the full horror of what Vance actually said in that clip, because he didn't stop with Crockett. He called a Democratic Senate candidate in Maine a Nazi, while claiming that candidate has a Nazi tattoo, which is projection of the most obscene kind, given that Vance said the conservative movement should be open to everyone, as long as they love America, declining to condemn a streak of anti-Semitism that has divided the Republican Party and roiled the opening days of Turning Point USA's annual convention, coming down firmly against purity tests, which is Republican speak for, we're going to platform white nationalists and Holocaust deniers, and anyone who objects to that is being divisive. And then Vance pivoted to the grand conspiracy theory that animates every fascist movement, declaring that these Democratic leaders don't actually matter because they are puppets and cogs in a machine that wants to make you poorer, that wants to make you less powerful, and wants to make you less safe in the country your ancestors built, which is blood and soil nationalism, dressed up in populist rhetoric. This is the great replacement theory with a fresh coat of paint. This is the exact ideological framework that scholars like Professor Nicholas DeGenova describe as Trump leading a white supremacist fascist movement. And you have to understand the context here, because this weekend's gathering of young Republicans offered a glimpse into the divisions already fraying Trump's coalition, even before its lame duck leader is out of the picture, with many in the movement viewing Vance as the man who can keep the party's big tent together through the Trump era and beyond. So what we're watching is nothing less than the unveiling of post-Trump Trumpism, the crystallization of MAGA ideology for the next generation, and the message Vance is sending to those young conservatives is unmistakable. Your enemies are not just wrong on policy, they are existential threats to your very existence. They are foreign infiltrators and race traitors and corrupt puppets of a sinister machine that wants to destroy everything your ancestors built. In a deeply partisan speech dripping in Christian nationalism, Vance called on the movement to turn its ire outward instead of inward, which is exactly what every authoritarian leader does when they need to consolidate power. You create an external enemy so threatening that internal dissent becomes impossible, because to question the leader is to side with those who want to annihilate you. The sheer audacity of this performance is breathtaking, because Vance also said the U.S. always will be a Christian nation, adding that Christianity is America's creed, which is not just historically illiterate, but represents a fundamental assault on the pluralistic foundations of American democracy. And he said this at an event where TPUSA's CEO Erica Kirk publicly endorsed Vance for president in 2028, declaring, "We are going to get my husband's friend J.D. Vance elected for 48 in the most resounding way possible, so we're watching the coronation of America's next would-be autocrat, and he's not even bothering to hide what he represents. The mask is completely off, and what's underneath is a deeply reactionary, white nationalist, Christian supremacist ideology that views democracy itself as an impediment to the real America they want to build." Let's talk about Jasmine Crockett's response because it illuminates everything about this moment. She posted on social media, asking people to imagine commenting on someone's nails while at the same time ignoring that the only reason you got your political dream job was because your boss incited a violent mob who wanted to hang your predecessor for honoring his oath to the Constitution. And this is the perfect encapsulation of the asymmetry we're dealing with here. Because on one side you have Democratic leaders trying to do the work of governance, trying to represent their constituents, trying to uphold constitutional principles, and on the other side you have Republicans who literally participated in an attempted coup and are now attacking black women's fingernails. The moral bankruptcy is so complete that it defies adequate description. And Crockett torn into Vance after he hurled this racist insult at her, during what should have been a moment of conservative movement building, but instead became a showcase for the most vicious forms of racialized and gendered attacks, because that's what these movements always devolve into, that's what fascism always requires, the creation of others who can be dehumanized and destroyed. Crockett slammed Vance's claims by pointing out that anybody who knows her credentials is aware that she is educated and has not fabricated a random tale about where she has come from, proudly calling herself authentic, because she has to defend her basic humanity and qualifications against a vice president who thinks her nails are a legitimate topic of political discourse. The historical echoes here are deafening, and scholars of authoritarianism have been sounding the alarm for years, because the risks for Republicans in running against a Democrat who would become the first woman, first black woman, and first person of South Asian descent to win the White House include Trump's history of racist and misogynistic attacks that could turn off key groups of swing voters. But what these analyses miss is that for the MAGA base, the cruelty is the point, the racism is the appeal, the misogyny is the feature, not the bug. When some Republican members began to cast Harris as a DEI hire, a reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative, they weren't making a mistake or revealing their ignorance. They were telegraphing to their base that they view any black woman in power as illegitimate by definition, and we need to connect this to the broader fascist ecosystem that TPUSA represents, because TPUSA played a crucial role in helping Trump get elected and boosting his campaign among young voters in 2024, and the four-day event has become a focal point for internal conservative movement debates featuring a strong push to inspire young conservative activists, following the assassination of founder Charlie Kirk. So this organization has become the primary vehicle for radicalizing Gen Z conservatives, and the message they're receiving from the Vice President of the United States is that racist attacks on black women are not just acceptable, but laudable. Think about what that does to a generation of young people. Think about how that normalizes violence and dehumanization. Think about how that prepares the ground for even worse atrocities to come. The Republican Party is struggling with a racism problem. And once it became clear that the Democratic presidential nominee would be a half-black, half-Indian woman, members of the grand old party began launching thinly veiled and sometimes plainly racist and sexist attacks. But the mainstream media continues to treat this as just another day in American politics, just another example of partisan polarization, just another manifestation of our divided electorate, when what we're actually witnessing is the steady march toward fascism happening in real time, with all the warning signs flashing red. J.D. Vance once again revived the pernicious specter of the welfare queen, saying Harris hasn't done anything in years other than to collect a government check, which is the Reagan-era racist dog whistle brought back for a new generation. Except now it's not even a dog whistle, it's just a regular whistle. It's just open racism celebrated and amplified. The most chilling part of all this is how Vance has at times sought to de-escalate conflict within the party, rather than join other Republicans' warning of a troubling strain of racism and anti-Semitism among younger conservatives, regularly defending young Republican operatives who shared Holocaust jokes and ethnic slurs, dismissing bipartisan backlash as pearl-clutching, and urging forgiveness for staffers who resigned over racist social media posts. This is the leadership of the Republican Party in 2025, a vice president who thinks Holocaust jokes are no big deal, who thinks the real problem is people being too sensitive about racism, who thinks the way forward for the conservative movement is to embrace the most toxic elements and tell everyone else to shut up and get in line. And let's be absolutely clear about what your ancestors built means in Vance's formulation, because it's not subtle, it's not coded, it's the explicit assertion that America belongs to white people, and specifically to the descendants of European settlers, and everyone else is a guest at best, or an invader at worst. This is the ideological foundation of every white supremacist movement in American history, and it's being articulated by the Vice President of the United States at the largest conservative youth gathering in the country. Republicans turned equity into a dirty word, criticizing diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives and wokeism to undermine tools Democrats have used to address racial disparities, while racially coded language was utilized along the campaign trail in ways that shock some voters but rally others who either appreciate racial tropes or are willing to ignore them. The Democratic response needs to be so much more forceful than it has been, because we cannot continue to play by Marquess of Queensberry rules when the other side is bringing fascist street tactics to the fight. Crockett submitted paperwork to enter the Senate race just hours before the state's deadline, and the Democratic primary has shaped up as a two-person race with Crockett leading at 51%. So she's not backing down, she's running toward the fight, and that's exactly what every progressive needs to do right now, because the stakes could not possibly be higher. When the Vice President of the United States can call a black congresswoman a street girl and face no meaningful consequences, when he can traffic in the most vicious stereotypes and the worst his party can muster is a weak "well, that's just JD being JD," then we are so far down the authoritarian road that the exits are disappearing behind us. Trump has supported political violence against opponents, with many academics citing his involvement in the January 6 Capitol attack as an example of fascism, and he has been accused of racism and xenophobia with respect to his rhetoric about illegal immigrants and his policies of mass deportation and family separation, and now his hand-picked successor is taking that playbook and running with it, refining it, making it more palatable to younger audiences who don't remember a time when this kind of rhetoric was absolutely beyond the pale. Scholars see the current political climate as the result of a decades-long trend toward the normalization of racist and sexist attacks, and that trajectory has continued without changing in 2024, which means every time we treat this as normal political discourse, every time we analyze Vance's racism through the lens of electoral strategy rather than moral catastrophe, we are participating in that normalization. The through line from Trump's initial campaign to this moment is unbroken and terrifyingly clear. Trump said immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country, and for months the GOP race has been shadowed by xenophobia, with some candidates embracing racist and white nationalist themes, partly reflecting how Trump has moved Republican politics toward the harder-edged us versus them view that now dominates the GOP's base and is reshaping its membership in Congress. What was once the fringe is now the center, what was once disqualifying is now required, what was once unthinkable is now routine. And here's what keeps me up at night. Here's what should terrify every person who cares about democracy and justice and basic human decency. Erica Kirk publicly endorsed Vice President J.D. Vance as the next Republican candidate for president in 2028, pledging the influential organization's support to propel Vance to the White House as the 48th president, which means the Republican Party isn't pulling back from this abyss. They're sprinting toward it with their eyes wide open, and their base cheering them on every step of the way. Over roughly a decade under Trump's leadership, the Republican Party has operated in lockstep with his wishes, and Trump won re-election in 2024 by pulling together contradicting coalitions including traditional conservatives, blue-collar populists, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, and the religious right, but that coalition only holds together through the identification of common enemies, through the constant stoking of fear and rage and resentment. The question isn't whether Vance is a fascist anymore, the question is what we're going to do about it, because for many scholars the answer to whether Trump meets the qualifications of a fascist boils down to January 6 when Trump's followers stormed the Capitol, and if Trump intended to overthrow the American Constitution and inaugurate a new order based on charismatic power, then he was absolutely a fascist, and Vance is Trump's chosen heir, the man who literally got his job because Mike Pence refused to participate in a coup, The historical irony would be funny if it weren't so horrifying. We are watching the death of American democracy happen in slow motion, and the mainstream media keeps analyzing it like it's a horse race, keeps both sizing it into oblivion, keeps treating fascist rhetoric as just another data point in the endless news cycle. But Trump's unhinged pledge to root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country was a line barely modified from its original 1930s Nazi form. And if we want American democracy to survive, our media must resist at all costs the urge to normalize extremist far-right rhetoric that history has shown is the precursor to state violence. Every historian of fascism is telling us what's happening. Every scholar of authoritarianism is sounding the alarm. Every survivor of genocide is begging us to wake up. And yet here we are watching J.D. Vance call Jasmine Crockett a street girl, and wondering if this will hurt him in the polls. The work ahead is enormous, and it requires us to be absolutely unflinching in our analysis, and utterly relentless in our resistance, because Vance acknowledged the controversies that dominated the Turning Point Conference, but did not define any boundaries for the conservative movement, besides patriotism, and the tension foreshadowed the treacherous political waters that anyone seeking the next Republican presidential nomination will need to navigate as top voices in the MAGA movement jockey for influence, with no clear path to holding the coalition together. That internal chaos is an opportunity, but only if progressives can offer a compelling alternative vision, only if we can articulate why democracy matters, why pluralism matters, why the dignity of every human being matters, in ways that resonate with people who feel left behind by the neoliberal consensus. This is the fight of our generation, and it demands everything we have, every ounce of moral courage, every bit of intellectual rigor, every fiber of our commitment to justice, because the alternative is accepting that America becomes a white supremacist Christian nationalist state, where people like Jasmine Crockett are forever dismissed as street girls with fake nails, where people like you and me are forever suspect because we don't fit the blood and soil definition of real Americans, where democracy becomes a memory and fascism becomes the future. That cannot happen, that must not happen, and it won't happen if we refuse to be silent, refuse to be complicit, refuse to accept that this is just politics as usual. This is the moment, this is the test, and history will judge us by how we respond.